Alright, welcome back. Alright, so in this video, we're now finally going to start talking about how to actually charge psychic energy. Or put another way, we're going to talk about how to charge your subconscious to use ESP. Right, and we're going to talk about the pre-charging phase for psychic energy. Now, what's interesting about psychic energy is that the pre-charging phase actually functions more like the main charging phase, right? So psychic energy is actually very different from all the other types, whether we're talking about emotional energy, creative energy, we talked about belief energy or transcendental control energy, or just really in terms of your other transcendental mental abilities, or even spiritual energy, which is your transcendental connection to God, right? Psychic energy functions differently from all of them because, like I said, the pre-charging phase actually functions more like the main charging phase. And the reason for that is because, which I'll actually talk about in a moment, but for now, I'll just say that you'll probably spend much more time pre-charging than main charging. Most of your time will actually be relatively, either in or relatively close to the pre-charging phase for psychic energy. At least in terms of my experience charging psychic energy, I haven't charged it too far, which I'll talk about what happens when you do that in a moment, at least as far as I've ever went with it. But yeah, your best bet in the beginning is to stay really close to the pre-charging phase. And the reason for that comes from the fact that your body is trying so hard to dampen the charge. But like I said, I'll go over that in a moment. But to go over this first point is very simple. This is how you would begin. Just to read it off, it says, pick the target and the piece of information you wish to extract from the target. Right, so like we said, the target is basically the subject of the sense intention, but putting that another way, the target is just a thing you want to pick, you want to psychically sense information about, right? So if you're using your psychic abilities to pick up some type of information from something, right, the target would be the thing you want information about. And you want to be clear about the piece of information you wish to extract from the target, right? So you don't want to, this is very simple, but I want to state it here to make it explicitly clear, right? You don't want to jump around from target to target, right? Because you have some vague idea of what the target is. You don't want to do that. You want to be very clear about the target and just focus on that particular target, not tangentially close targets or similar targets. Or if you're trying to pick up information about something, you might think it's this target, then you might think it's that target, or jump to this. Like, no, because you're not going to charge properly if you do that. Secondly, you want to be clear about the piece of information you want. Do you want visual information? Do you want audible information? Do you want tactile information? Or do you want abstract information, like its history or its relationship to other things like that? That's, and like I said, that has to do with the, what you might call the Claire type, for example. Now, for our purposes here, we're going to really just talk about visual information. We're basically just going to use that as a template for our discussion. So we're talking about visual information, which is basically just clairvoyance. But like I said before, the rules you would use apply to all types, whether we're talking about clairaudience, claircognizance, which is sensing abstract information from the target, whatever. It's basically all the same, but we're just going to use clairvoyance as a template. Next, so the next thing you want to do is you want to hold, so the intention you would use to enter a transcendental state, which we'll describe the process more in a moment, but when you're holding it, so the process starts the same, right? Even though this is the pre-charge session, you would hold an intention, right, until you enter a transcendental state, even for the main charging phase, but you would hold an intention to see the target and not visualize it. So that's very important, right? So you want to hold the intention to see and not visualize or guess. Now, that's a little bit tricky. I'm trying to think of a more simple way of explaining that, but I feel like that's as simple as I could make it. And basically, let's say I have a target in my mind. Let's say it's some picture that's hidden from me, right? The intention that I would express, or the command component of that intention would express, see the target, see the target, see the target, something like that, right? And and that's fundamentally different. Your subconscious responds differently to that from the intention to creatively visualize. So if I have the intention that says I want to create something, maybe like the target or what I think the target looks like, then your subconscious is just going to start creating, right? It's not going to see it, right? Now, the thing about seeing that's important is that we rarely ever even produce a see intention, right? or even a hear intention or a touch intention, right? Now, why is that the case? Well, the reason is that your body does most of the seeing for you, or pretty much all of the seeing, I really should say. And what I mean by that is, remember what I said before, your subconscious has the ability to express itself or express a subconscious action in the form of sensing things, sensing reality. That is different from the subconscious action of creating something, right? When it's sensing something, it's picking up information from some aspect of reality, and it's expressing itself in the form of sensing, and your subconscious alters your perception to perceive that sensing. And it can do it in two ways, right? So it can do it in the more spatial way, which is just in the local reality around you. It does it in the form of the five senses for the body, and it can do it in your mind, right? So in your imagination, it could still alter your perception to perceive something that you're sensing, right? So very important. Now, when you hold the intention to see, your subconscious will alter your perception, and in your imagination, you will see, well, again, not talking about involuntary sensing from your spirit, I'm just talking about the voluntary kind. It'll alter your perception to perceive something that your that your spirit is actually seeing, right, or sensing at a distance. So that's very important. The see intention is different from the create intention or creatively visualize. Or guess. A lot of psychics do that too, right? When people, I don't like to say it that way because I feel like most psychics are doing something demonic, right? I'm just telling you how this works. Again, this is for people who have gotten approval by God to do things like this, right? You don't want to do this unless God has approved. But I'm just saying that a lot of people who even get into psychic abilities, they don't recognize that holding the intention to guess or create, right? Your subconscious will respond to those intentions, and it's just going to respond by charging up to guess or charging up to just to create, right? No, you have to hold the intention to see. Now, normally your subconscious doesn't charge in response to that intention. So when people hold that, I'm sure at some point they hold that intention, their subconscious does nothing, and then they just start guessing or creatively visualizing. So there could be more activity in their mind. Now, the reason the subconscious doesn't really ever do much in response to the see intention is because this body is dampening your subconscious ability to express itself in the form of sensing, right? Because that's the part of your subconscious that would respond to this intention. When you hold the intention to see, then your subconscious is going to charge up to impact your spirit or activate your third eye so you can see, right? It's going to do exactly what your intention says. But that particular response is blocked or highly dampened by your body. So when you hold the intention to see, your subconscious mostly doesn't do anything, and then at some point you just move on to creating or visualizing so your subconscious actually does something, but that's not a psychic ability. Now, like I said before, your body does pretty much all the seeing for you, and that combined with the fact that the subconscious doesn't really do anything in response to the see intention, right? You never really produce this intention, right? You just produce the intention to visualize or create or guess or things like that. But here, you want to make sure you're producing this intention. Now, at first, it's not going to feel like anything's happening, right? And again, most people's mind would just move on in response to that. But no, you want to make sure you're using this intention to see. That's going to be the one that actually allows you to sense the target. If you hold the intention to guess the target or visualize the target in a creative way or something like that, your subconscious is not going to charge psychic energy. It's actually going to charge creative energy, which is different. So now, to go over the actual process, right? So again, we're talking about pre-charging. So it starts off the same, right? You would just pre-charge in intervals of 10 seconds, roughly. And what that means is you would just hold the intention to see the target. So we're talking about clairvoyance. You just hold the intention to see the target roughly for 10 seconds. And that's it. So that's the very first pre-charge session, right? You got the target, right? You know you want to pick up visual information about the target. Then you would just hold the intention to see the target for 10 seconds. Now, the second part is really where things change a little bit. Mostly still the same, but it changes. So I'll actually just go a little bit into the story. When I was actually practicing to charge, psychic energy, so this was many years ago, right? So this was many years ago, at least when I first started doing it. I didn't have the idea of pre-charging and didn't know about main charge, didn't have them broken up into phases, definitely didn't know about deep charging. They didn't know about positive memory, negative memory, or any of that stuff. But I tried to charge psychic energy again later, which I'll actually talk about that. Maybe I'll talk about it by the end of the video, why I started doing it again. So I just started doing it again, right? Now, by this time, I had the whole theory pretty much built up, right? Until I knew of the idea of positive memory, negative memory, deep charging, short-term memory, long-term memory, passive memory, active memory. So I understood the concept of the intermittent principle of transcendental states. I knew to hold intention for 7 seconds. So I knew pretty much had the theory that I have now around that time. So I decided to charge psychic energy again, which I hadn't done in years around this time. And what I started doing is I started trying to pre-charge, right? So I started pre-charging psychic energy, and I noticed something very interesting. So normally when I pre-charge, right, I'll charge it for 10 seconds, then I'll wait roughly 10 minutes, so that's what we talked about before, then I'll pre-charge it again. Now, when I was doing it for psychic energy, I was actually running an experiment at the time with it. I noticed that after 10 minutes, I did that a couple times, and then I ran into the exact problem that I ran into before, right? Which is energy just stopped charging. Couldn't do anything after a while. In other words, negative memory, or the entropy rate, was so high that it prevented me even from pre-charging, at least in those intervals. And that was very interesting to me because that has never happened to me, right? I can always pre-charge. Pre-charging is the easiest type of charge to do. I can always pre-charge as long as I do in about 10-second intervals, and then I wait roughly 10 minutes, and I could pre-charge again. So I was trying to build psychic energy as fast as I could, right? So I'm waiting a full 10 minutes. I did it a couple of sessions, and I could charge it a little bit each session, but then I could feel it dropping off, and then eventually just didn't feel like I was charging at all. So I thought that was very interesting, again, because that's never happened to me with pre-charging. So I'm like, you know what? Let me wait longer. Let me wait longer than 10 minutes. So I'm waiting longer and longer and longer. And what I'm doing is now during your pre-charge sessions, you're not supposed to focus on the target or the subject of the what you're pre-charging, because that'll build up transient negative memory, which we talked about that in book 1 in chapter 11. But I would focus on it just a little bit to see how much negative memory it felt like was there, or how powerful the transient negative memory was. And I would feel it weakening over time, and it felt like the intention or the energy was fresh, or almost like new again, which is how it kind of feels when you're pre-charging, because there's no negative memory. And so I would do it I would keep doing it and waiting longer and longer and longer until it felt fresh again, fresh enough for me to pre-charge. And so as I kept doing that, I eventually started to have an idea of how long it takes transient negative memory to go away for the pre-charge phase. And to go away for psychic energy. And the number I pretty much got to is approximately 1 hour, right? It was closer to like maybe 45, 50 minutes, but we'll just approximate and say 1 hour. And so that's actually something I realized about psychic energy that's different from all other types of energy. And that's, to go over this point, says wait at least an hour before pre-charging again. So very important. That doesn't really apply. I mean, you could do it for the other types of energy, but you don't really need to. You can wait roughly 10 minutes and then it'll charge again, right? So I thought this was very interesting, right? So psychic energy is different. You want to pre-charge for about 10 seconds, and then wait roughly an hour, right? You can definitely wait longer, but at least I would say no less than an hour before pre-charging again. Otherwise, negative memory is just going to build up too fast, and it's just going to block your ability to charge psychic energy. Now, the reason for that, I believe, is, like I said before, is that your body works really hard to block psychic energy and prevent it from charging. So when you produce the see intention or the hear intention, you may occasionally produce it throughout the day, right? You probably don't produce it very often. You could usually produce the intention to visualize or create, or creatively hear or creatively visualize something in your mind or something like that. But occasionally when you do, your subconscious doesn't do much in response to it because it is so blocked, right? And this prevents your psychic abilities from charging, or psychic energy from charging. Now, the thing about pre-charging is, like I said before, is pre-charging is virtually an entropy dead zone, right? So even for your body, even as much as your body as hard as your body works to block psychic energy, even then, in that moment, or even when you're pre-charging, there's still not enough negative memory to entirely block it during the pre-charge phase. So if you constantly pre-charge psychic energy or stay in the pre-charging phase, as hard as your body's trying to work to block it, it still can't block it all the way in that phase, and so it's able to charge a little bit. However, transient negative memory sticks around much longer, and I believe that's because of the fact your body works so hard to block it. So it stays around much longer than all the other forms of subconscious energy or the expressions of subconscious energy, because those are allowed to kind of flow freely, right? So, or more freely. Those are still dampened a little bit by your ground state, but they flow much more freely than psychic energy. So your subconscious has a bias where it prevents which comes from your body, but your subconscious has a bias which prevents subconscious energy from charging anywhere near as easily as your other transcendental mental abilities. So again, you would pre-charge psychic energy, then wait about an hour in between pre-charging sessions. And during that time, again, you don't want to focus on the target at all. You don't want to focus on the target at all, especially because it's so sensitive. Psychic energy is so sensitive to negative memory, or builds up negative memory so quickly, or the entropy rate is so high, you don't want to think about it. Just focus on other things. Don't think about the target at all or trying to pick up information about it. And then after about an hour, you can finally focus on the target again, hold the same sense intention or the intention to see the target, do that for 10 seconds, then then don't think about it again for at least an hour. You could wait 2 or 3 hours, but you just keep doing that. You do that over and over and over again. Now, I'm thinking, do I want to talk about that now? Yeah, I could go over it now. So that's very important, right? Now, because psychic energy is dampened so much by the body, you're going to spend likely most of your time charging in the pre-charge phase. We are going to talk about the main charging phase in the next video, but most of it you're going to spend pre-charging. In fact, you're actually going to start to, if you go further and further with it, you're actually going to start to deep charge in the pre-charging phase, which is still possible. Right? If you just keep pre-charging like this over the course of 7 days, eventually psychic energy is going to start to deep charge. And you're going to kind of stay in that phase as well. We'll talk a little more about that in the next video, but that's basically how you build psychic energy. Now, in terms of what actually happens in your mind as you're charging energy, just to go over here, while in a transcendental state, images related to the target will start to pop into your mind. This will occur more and more often as your this will occur more and more as your psychic energy charges. So that's basically how. Now we're going to talk more about this process because I don't really want to go over it yet. Right now I'm just talking more or less how to build psychic energy. But this is ultimately the part of the process where you actually collect the information related to using your psychic abilities. So as your psychic energy charges, right, or as you hold the intention to sense the target and charge your subconscious around that intention, what's actually happening, so this is the whole theory of how this works, your subconscious will start to organize itself. So we talked about subconscious organization, right? It'll start to organize in a way that allows your subconscious to create something that's based on what it's sensing. So it almost acts like a suggestion. So we talked about it before, when you're sleeping, and if you hear some sound on the TV, you might notice you start dreaming things related to what you're picking up from the TV. And your body's sensing information from the TV, which is going to your brain. Now their brain is sending information to the subconscious, but it's like the signal's much weaker, right? Your subconscious is not in the ground state as much, and it's not picking up information as strongly from your body. That's how you're able to sleep. But it is still picking up some information, at least from the 5 senses of your body. And the information picked up from those 5 senses acts as a suggestion when you're sleeping. And so your subconscious instinct will choose to create in some way or express itself in some way based on that suggestion. That's exactly how it works. So in that case you're sensing from the physical body, but when you're sensing from the spirit, the same exact thing happens. When you're in a transcendental state and your spirit senses something at a distance, it's going to start to create in a way that's based on what you're sensing, which again acts as a suggestion. I'll just go over a little more of that process later, but ultimately that's how it works, right? So now in this case, because the intention is to see, your subconscious is going to organize itself in a way that allows you to start creating things based on what it would be like, based on the experience of seeing the target, basically. So again, we'll talk more about it later, because I can go into it. I can go into a little deeper, but that's basically how it works. You're going to create images in your mind that are based on the target, and you use that information to collect information about the target. This last point, I just wrote this here in case I forgot to mention it, but to go over this, it says stop focusing on the target once the feeling of psychic energy peaks after about 10 seconds, and avoid thinking about the target at all in between pre-charge sessions. So the last part I already said, but for that second part, as you keep going in and out of a pre-charge session, right? So as you keep pre-charging your psychic energy, you would pre-charge for about 10 seconds, wait at least an hour or longer, then pre-charge again, and you would keep doing that over and over and over again. And you're going to start to feel your subconscious charging psychic energy. Like I said, when I used to do this, I would keep holding the intention to charge, and I wouldn't feel anything. Nothing would happen, right? But when I started doing it this way, I could feel my subconscious charging more and more in response to the sense intention. And as you feel it charging, or when you're pre-charging, you're going to feel it charging, and then you're going to feel it drop off when you go too long, which is exactly what I said before. So you want to pre-charge and then stop so you want to stop focusing on the target and holding intention to see it. You want to stop before it, or at least really at the peak, but you want to stop before it drops off, which is roughly, like I said, around 10 seconds. But yeah, so for pre-charging in general, you're going to feel the energy rising for those first 7 to 10 seconds. And then if you go longer than 10 seconds, you're going to feel the energy drop off. You want to make sure to stop focusing on your target and stop pre-charging before that happens. And as long as you keep pre-charging right until the peak of the feeling of that energy, right, as you're charging, then your subconscious is going to keep charging psychic energy more and more and more and more. And like I said, eventually it's going to deep charge. And as it deep charges, your subconscious is going to become more charged up with psychic energy, which means your spirit is becoming more active, or your spirit's ability to sense things is becoming more active and more intense. And you're going to be able to sort of see things clearer and clearer and clearer, right? And your spirit is going to be able to sense things with greater and greater clarity, right? I have never deep charged that far with it. I have done it only one time. I'd probably say maybe 2 times I've deep charged psychic energy. Again, it's really hard to if you don't know what you're doing, because the body blocks it so much, right? But I have done it before. I've done it, I think roughly 2 times I've managed to deep charge psychic energy. And I felt very depressed when I was doing it because I wasn't doing it in a way approved by God. So I was very depressed, had trouble sleeping, like I said. I told you guys about how I had headaches, so my head was hurting like crazy. I haven't talked about the subconscious burst yet, which that plays a role here too. I'll talk about it next video. But I can at least say when I used to use a subconscious burst with this, excitement burst, which again I didn't call it that at the time. I used to actually call it a push because that's what it felt like I was doing. But that would cause my head to hurt like crazy, right? It would hurt so much when I would do that, but I felt it was more accurate when I did. We'll talk more about accuracy and things like that later in another video. This is just the beginning of the process. But yeah, so I haven't done it very much. And again, I don't really recommend to do any of this unless you have approval by God and He's directing you in what to do, right? But yeah, that's pretty much it. Now, in the next video, we're going to actually talk about the main charging phase. So there is still a main charging phase, but for the most part, you would generally try to build energy in your pre-charging phase with psychic energy. So that's it for now, though. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.